Most people waste a lot of time trying to strengthen up their rotator cuff completely wrong. In this video, I'm gonna show you the best exercises you could do to address this. What's up guys, Dr. Nick Bonforte to talk all about rotator cuff. Now I'm sure you see all over the internet rotator cuff exercises, the classic one where you just take a band and you just do this all day, every day, and it seems like you could do thousands of reps. First, we gotta scale back and figure out what we're actually dealing with when we're talking about the rotator cuff. Now, the idea is to get a better understanding of what it is and how it functions, and then also the exercises to actually do for this. Now, the rotator cuff is composed of 4 different muscles, 2 on the back, which is the teres minor and the infraspinatus, 1 on the top, which is called the supraspinatus, and 1 on the front, which is called the subscapularis. Now, what these muscles do when they originate on the scapula bone and then go into attach to the arm bone, they essentially act as a suction cup from the head of the arm bone into the shoulder blade. It acts for good stabilization and stability as you're moving your arm through motion. The shoulder joint is one of the most mobile joints in the body, so it needs good stabilization as you're moving the arm through space. If there's a deficiency in strength of a rotator cuff or there's a tear in one of the muscles, it can distribute these forces on the rotator cuff muscles and other stabilizing joints and cause some of these issues. So we gotta make sure the rotator cuff muscles are good from a foundational standpoint from strength and stability, and then also zooming out to work around the shoulder blade area on muscles that act on the scapula to ultimately improve shoulder stabilization and strength so that when you're moving your arm and throughout space and doing things, it has that strength and stability for that. Now that you have a better understanding of locally what's going on at the rotator cuff, the 4 muscles, we have to zoom out and also think about the surrounding muscles around the shoulder joint, the periscapular muscles, muscles that have a function on the shoulder blade, which indirectly relate to how the rotator cuff is actually functioning. Because if these muscles that are surrounding the shoulder blade aren't good from a stability standpoint or from a strength standpoint, the rotator cuff has to overwork for that lack of effort as a compensation or a compensatory movement, leading to maybe excessive strain or stresses to the rotator cuff. So the muscles that we're gonna be focusing on with the exercises to get essentially a 2-for-1, most bang for your buck, rotator cuff and also periscapular muscles are the lower trap, which is part of the trapezius muscle, which has 3 different parts, the upper, the middle, and the lower. We'll be focusing on exercises that hit the lower and a little bit of the middle trap. And then we're gonna be focusing on muscles that affect the deltoid. The deltoid muscle has 3 different parts as well, the anterior, the lateral, and the posterior. We'll be focusing on the ones that hit the back a little bit. So we're getting more bang for your buck when you're actually addressing with strength and stability with these exercises versus just trying to isolate the rotator cuff. Because we can't isolate muscles. We could try to bias it and get more activation to it, but it's impossible just to say we're gonna address only this part of the muscle. It's impossible. When things activate, a lot of things activate. The connective tissue around your areas of your joint, of your bones and your joints, they're all connected somehow. So we try to bias the activation patterns to these muscles versus trying to just isolate this one specific muscle fiber or muscle. So we're gonna be hitting those different muscles in today's video. So let's get into it. So this exercise, we're focusing on side-lying external rotation of the shoulder. We're gonna be biasing 2 areas of the muscular complex of the shoulder joint. The external rotators of the rotator cuff, infraspinatus and teres minor, and then the lower trap. This muscle has been shown to hit the lower trap, which is important because it acts on the shoulder blade. So what you're gonna do is put your elbow right by the side of your body and you wanna pin your shoulder blade back and down to hold it and stabilize the scapula bone. So in this case, we're taking the dumbbell and from here, I'm keeping my elbow anchored to the side of the body and I'm just lifting up to about this height and then I come back down. And I like to actually hold an isometric at the end position to get more time under tension. So you'll feel the back of the cuff, the rotator cuff of the shoulder really burning, especially as you up the reps here. With this one, I like to do anywhere from 3 sets of 12 to 15 to really get more time under tension to this area. You could also manipulate it by getting more tempo to it, where you're holding at the end. When you hold it, you get more duration under load so that you're getting more muscular activation to this. Now, the thing to keep in mind is when you're going up like this, you don't want to go up too far where then gravity is not actually pushing down on the shoulder, because you want gravity to be pushing down on it so it actually activates more of the muscles. Now, when you get further and further up like this, gravity is really not pushing down just because of the angle and the physics. So you want to stay really at this almost parallel position to the ground, or a little bit higher than parallel position. So parallel or a little bit higher than parallel, that's where you want to start or stop during this exercise versus going too high. Now also keep in mind the weight. Now if the higher the weight you go, you're going to be compensating because it's going to be hard, because you're trying again to bias muscles here, the small external rotator cuff muscles of the shoulder. If you go higher, you won't be able to just isolate or bias this motion. You'll tend to then start rocking the shoulder blade like this to help out, and then it becomes essentially a middle back or upper back exercise. You want to bias the rotator cuff muscles and the lower trap in this by keeping it stabilized down and back, and then just focus on moving up and then down, up and then down. You'll notice my shoulder blade isn't moving at all. It's rock solid. I'm just moving my arm up and down, and you'll feel your shoulder fire up and light up in terms of a muscular effort. So the weight here should be really low, and you want to focus on repping it out. And by the time you get to about 12 to 15, if it's not burning, then you got to focus on if the form is actually right. Because I've worked with many people, bodybuilders, that can bench press 350, overhead press 200, and they struggle really with 5 pounds, 10 pounds by repping this out. So you want to keep nice focused effort to keeping the shoulder blade down and back. You stabilize the shoulder, and then you just go up to about parallel again, or a little bit above, and then back down. You could either again rep it out, where you just hold for a second and then down, hold for a second and then down, or you can add tempo to it, where you go up, hold for 5 seconds and then down. That'll put more time under attention to this. Now with this exercise, we are just doing scaptions. This one is a good one to bias the rotator cuff muscles, specifically the supraspinatus, and then also some of the deltoid muscles. There's been some studies that have shown that when you work into the scapular plane, we could help bias parts of the rotator cuff muscles, such as supraspinatus, so that it helps function through a range of motion. So when we're going through the scapular plane, we want to keep in mind that actual plane of motion. When we're going up into this, we want to think about dissecting us into essentially a 90-degree angle right here. Now you go into that 45-degree angle, that would be the scapular plane. So if this was a 0 starting point, and then this would be 90, so that would be the angle of 90 degrees right there. So here is the x-axis, this is the y-axis right there. So 0, 90 right there. We're gonna go 45. So you wanna visualize that as we go into this. So 45 degrees as we go up, or to be less complicated, just go 10 and 2 if you're thinking about a clock. So I got a little bit too techie with that, but 10 to 2, when you're going up into this, this will help give you a good bias region to go into that 45-degree angle or that scapular plane of motion. Now, when you're doing scaptions, you want to keep also in mind the elbow position. A lot of times when we're using weights to go into the scaption exercise, we'll tend to bend the arm and shrug up like this because the weight is too heavy. You want to keep your arms locked out so we get more effort and force to the shoulder complex. But in order to do that, you want to keep in mind the actual weight that you're using. The idea isn't to just try to hold 50 pounds and do this, because more often than not, it's just not reasonable to hold such a heavy weight and bias these muscles effectively with that. You're going to be kicking on other muscles and likely be compensating by rocking the body back. So common things that I see when people are doing this is, one, bending the elbows and shrugging up because they're doing it too heavy, or using momentum to raise up. The weights should be low to again help bias the cuff muscles and the shoulder muscles a little bit better than just doing weight to do weight. So keep your arms locked out. Thumbs are going to be in an upward direction. So when you're raising up, you don't want to think the thumb down, thumb up. So as you're going up, and you keep the elbows locked out, 45 degree. I like to stop really at that shoulder height or slightly above it, and then you come back down. So the weights are low on purpose to help bias the cuff muscles and really bias the shoulder where I'm not bending my elbows or rocking back. You do these techniques like this, you'll hit that much more effectively. Now with this exercise, we're working on twofold where we're pushing the elbow into the back of us, hitting the posterior delt, keeping that, and then externally rotating the shoulder. We're biasing the external rotator cuff muscles now in more of an open chain, more functional position in life. We're also hitting the posterior delt and also some of the other periscapular muscles too in the upper back. But the thing is, when we're going up and pulling, you want to try to keep a parallel position of the arm to the ground first. Then you maintain that position and just work on actual rotating the shoulder back. That will help bias those muscles. So we're here, we pull, my arm stays parallel to the position or parallel to the ground, and then from here, keeping a 90-degree angle at my elbow, I'm just gonna rotate back like this, and then I come forward and then back to the starting point. When you do this nice and controlled with appropriate weight or appropriate resistance, you'll actually really start to fire up the shoulder and the whole shoulder complex. Versus when you go a little bit too heavy, compensations happen throughout this exercise, such as just swinging the arm back like this into one motion. It's really not biasing it because we're calling on other muscles to help out, but we're just rushing through the motion, especially when you get the resistance high. So this resistance does not have to be high. It could be low where you can really start to target this. Also, another common thing that I see done incorrectly is when you start to rotate up, your elbow starts to drop. So it'll be here, you'll rotate up, you'll just drop the elbow, and you're really just trying to essentially just do a wrist curl when you do this. So you don't want to be doing this, dropping the elbow and just curling back with your wrist like so. You want to pull back, maintain that position, then rotate up. Notice my elbow didn't drop, and then come back, and then back to the start position, you repeat. So my humerus bone or my biceps and my triceps, they're really staying parallel to the ground the whole time as I do this versus dropping. That will help really bias what you're trying to target here throughout this exercise. So I hope this video gave you some insight on how to address the rotator cuff muscles a little bit more effectively than the classic stuff we see all over online. This incorporated different muscles, the periscapular muscles and the rotator cuff, to help bias those muscles so that we can get twofold out of everything versus just trying to isolate a specific muscle. Because as you know, in this video, you can't isolate a particular muscle, a particular fiber. You are working everything depending on the movement you're doing. You're just trying to bias positions and bias muscles a little bit more effectively to get more out of all this. So hopefully these exercises gave you some value and insight, and I really do hope you gained and learned throughout this video. If you did find value in this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe down to my channel below, like this video, leave any comments down in the comment section, and I'll get back to them. And let me know if this was helpful and what exercises or other videos you'd like to see from me. Until next time, this is Dr. Nick.